At a family wedding, my brother laughed loudly. Here's to dreamers, they make the builders look even better. Everyone toasted as I smiled politely. 20 years later, I bankrupted every venture with surgical precision. When the dust cleared, his grandchildren lost access to higher education funds. Old money connections blacklisted them. And his great-grandchildren carry fake last names on every legal document to avoid instant discrimination. I was 39 years old when my brother, Paul, humiliated me at our cousin Ava's wedding. It was one of those big family weddings in Milwaukee. Fancy ballroom, champagne fountains, live band, the whole deal. My life was already falling apart, and I hadn't told anyone yet. I had tried 3 times to start my own business, and all 3 had failed. I was running out of money. My marriage was hanging by a thread. I was staying in a motel off the interstate, lying to people about where I lived. So I smiled when I didn't want to. I sat near the middle of the long banquet table. Paul was standing at the far end, laughing and giving one of his stupid off-the-cuff speeches. Everyone loves Paul. He's loud, confident, and married into old money. His wife's family owns a construction business that builds half the malls and hospitals you see driving through the Midwest. He raised his glass and started a toast. He said the usual stuff: love, family, Ava's happiness, blah blah. Everyone clapped. Then he looked straight at me. No one else noticed at first. He smiled. And then he said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. Here's to the dreamers. They make the builders look even better. Then he laughed. A big fake belly laugh. People laughed with him. They raised their glasses, toasted, smiled. Even my mom laughed. I felt heat rise up into my face, but I smiled too. That was my mistake. I should have walked out. I should have said something. But instead, I just raised my glass like everyone else. I sat there like a damn fool while he took a shot at me right in front of the whole family. Everyone at that table knew I'd just failed for the 3rd time trying to launch my tech consulting firm. That toast wasn't clever. It wasn't innocent. It was a reminder. A gut punch delivered with a grin. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the motel, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I'd spent 15 years trying to make something out of nothing. And my own brother, who had everything handed to him, decided I was nothing but a joke. I remember thinking, all right, I see how it is. That was the day the idea started forming. Not revenge, exactly. Not yet. But something colder. Something patient. The first 5 years after that wedding were awful. I moved to Detroit because I found the only job that would take me data entry at a second-tier financial services company. My wife finally left. We didn't have kids, thank God, and she got tired of waiting for me to make it. I didn't blame her. She left me with a used mattress and a beat-up Toyota Corolla. I kept my head down. I started watching, learning. My job wasn't glamorous, but I had access. I started seeing patterns. How companies moved money. How they hid things. How they got around rules. I didn't report anything. I just watched. Then I started asking around. I bought drinks for junior staff. I hung around after hours. I made friends with low-level compliance guys, the kind nobody pays attention to. The ones who really know what's going on. I made it a point to be helpful, reliable, forgettable. 10 years in, I had moved up a little. I got promoted, started working with firms in Chicago, Atlanta, Phoenix. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, quiet. Paul, on the other hand, was building an empire. He had turned his father-in-law's construction company into a brand. The Ridley Group. Sounds fancy, right? They built hospitals, mixed-use buildings, and stadium parking garages. They were doing deals in 5 states. Paul was on magazine covers. He was a keynote speaker at trade events. My mom would send me articles with his picture and write stuff like, "So proud of your brother." I never replied. Instead, I started paying very close attention. I created burner email accounts. I joined forums. I hired a private researcher to pull public filings, court records, contract awards. I waited. By year 15, I had everything I needed. I had dozens of documents showing how Paul's firm cut corners, used cheap materials, bribed zoning boards, submitted fake inspections. I had testimony from 2 former employees who were fired after raising red flags. I had connections inside one of the regional banks that financed several of his builds. They told me Paul had 3 properties way over-leveraged. I wasn't just looking to hurt him. I wanted to undo him. I wanted his name to be a warning sign. So I started. First, I tipped off a small investigative news blog in Atlanta. They had once written about shady contracts tied to local developers, but nothing stuck. I gave them documents, emails, names. The article exploded. It connected Paul's firm to unlicensed subcontractors and 2 building collapses that had quietly been paid off. Then came the lawsuits. Whistleblowers came forward. More journalists dug in. Someone at the IRS reached out to me anonymously. I played dumb. Banks froze some of his accounts pending audits. 3 investors pulled out of his Phoenix project. Then the state of Illinois canceled their pending deal with him. He still wasn't ruined, but he was bleeding. But the most painful part? I saved that for his grandchildren. Paul had 5 grandkids, 1 from each of his 3 kids, and 2 from his oldest son, Mark. Paul had been putting money aside for them in private educational trusts. The accounts were clean on paper, but the money came from commingled sources, some of which were now under federal investigation. When the SEC stepped in, the trusts were considered assets tied to possible fraud. Frozen. Permanently. His oldest grandson got pulled from Yale 2 weeks before orientation. Another one got rejected from Stanford after the admissions office couldn't verify financial disclosures. The others didn't even try. They knew the name Ridley was a dead weight. So they changed it. Not legally. Not yet. But when they applied for internships, they used their mother's maiden name. On social media, they hid their family ties. Some people called it overreaction. I called it justice. His name was poison. It meant locked doors. Exactly what he wanted for me. Paul didn't stay quiet forever. About a year after the story broke in Atlanta, I heard through the family grapevine that he had hired a private investigator. I expected it. Honestly, I was surprised it took him that long. He must have suspected someone close to the business, or maybe someone from the past. I made sure none of it traced back to me. All the tips, the files, the leaks, every single one was done through firewalled VPNs, prepaid burners, and mail drops registered under fake names. But Paul wasn't stupid. He knew this wasn't random. One night I got a call from my cousin Danny, who still worked in Milwaukee. He told me Paul had flown in unannounced and started asking questions about me. Whether I'd ever spoken out about the company. If I was in contact with any reporters. Subtle stuff, but he was fishing. Then Danny said something that made my blood run cold. He said he knows you never let stuff go. He said, my little brother's always had a long memory and a bitter streak. I didn't reply. I just nodded and hung up. The next week, someone broke into my office in Grand Rapids. Nothing was stolen. No cash, no computers, not even my backup drive. But the file cabinet I kept locked, the one that didn't even have anything real in it, was open. They were looking for something. They didn't find it. I kept everything off-site. Always had. That's when I realized the game had changed. I scaled back for a while. I stopped sending files. I let the news cycle cool down. People moved on. Paul was dealing with lawsuits, but none of them had hit criminal court yet. His reputation was wrecked, his deals frozen, but he was still walking around like he could fix it. He even had the nerve to do a podcast interview, one of those entrepreneur resilience shows. I listened to the whole thing. He blamed everything on poor oversight and bad hiring. He said he was a victim of a toxic business environment. He never once said sorry. Not to the contractors who lost their homes. Not to the families in the collapsed buildings. Not to his investors. And definitely not to me. That's when I decided to go after what he cared about most. His legacy. What most people didn't know was that Paul had been working on something big, a luxury retirement village outside Charleston. It was supposed to be his final project. Classy. Elegant. A place where wealthy retirees could live in peace, golf every day, drink wine by the lake, and say they were part of the Ridley experience. He'd already sunk millions into the land and permits, but it was all held together by one thing. A partnership with a prominent East Coast capital group that had direct ties to a major political donor. That donor? I knew something about him. I knew his brother, a guy I had once worked with at a compliance firm in D.C. A guy who owed me a favor after I helped him quietly clean up a mess that could have gotten him disbarred. So I called him. I gave him one folder. Just one. Inside were pictures, dated emails, signed contractor logs showing Paul's company had used illegal labor from an unlicensed subcontractor on 3 senior housing sites. 2 workers had died. OSHA had quietly closed the case after a settlement was paid in cash, off the books. The donor dropped the deal within 24 hours. The retirement village was dead. But Paul didn't know why. That was the part one enjoyed the most. Watching him scramble, blame his CFO, fire his legal team, and go on LinkedIn talking about sabotage and enemies within. He never saw me. The next twist came when one of his own kids turned on him. Mark, the oldest son, the one who was supposed to inherit the Ridley empire, had been running a marketing firm in Ohio. Turns out, Paul had secretly borrowed from Mark's accounts when the company started bleeding. He never told him. He just pulled the funds from a silent partnership agreement Mark had signed years ago without reading. When Mark found out, he lost his mind. He sued his own father. Publicly. Said Paul abused the trust of his own family for personal survival. Called him a fraud with a tie. The court case made headlines. But what really hurt Paul was that nobody, not even his other kids, defended him. His daughter, Melissa, moved to Oregon and stopped using the Ridley name altogether. His youngest, Josh, changed his last name to his mother's maiden name when he got married and told people Paul was distant. That broke something in him. But still, I wasn't finished. Because the worst part was still coming. Say the word and I'll keep going. The final twists are personal, sharp, and the consequences go deep. Paul didn't show up to Thanksgiving the next year. First time in 30 years. My mom said he was taking time for himself. That he needed to regroup and heal. I didn't say anything. I just poured gravy over my turkey and listened to everyone else pretend like he wasn't a walking ghost of his former self. Truth was, Paul was hiding. The lawsuits had drained him dry. He had sold off most of his shares in the Ridley Group to cover legal bills. What he didn't expect was that one of the minority shareholders, a quiet partner from New Jersey, would flip on him the second he had leverage. Paul lost voting control of his own company. He wasn't fired. That would have been too clean. He was pushed to the side. They gave him a fake title, Chairman Emeritus, and took away every single decision-making power he had. His email was redirected to an assistant. His office was emptied while he was out of town. They didn't even keep his name on the door. He'd show up to board meetings and sit there like a guest in his own empire. That might have been the end. But it got worse. Because the shareholder from New Jersey? I'd met him once years back at a conference in Chicago. He was arrogant, cutthroat, the kind of guy Paul used to admire. I reached out to him. Told him exactly what I knew about Paul's remaining offshore assets, the stuff he hadn't disclosed in the audits. Cayman accounts, shell companies, holding company stock options. Illegal, maybe not outright, but shady enough to scare anyone in the middle of a federal investigation. In exchange for my info, I asked for just one thing. A copy of Paul's company ID. Revoked. Marked inactive. He sent it to me in a FedEx envelope, no note, just the plastic card with a hole punched through the side. I framed it. But not everything went the way I planned. 2 months later, I got a visit from a man in a blue windbreaker. He said he was from a private legal group handling cross-state financial inquiries. Polite but sharp. Too sharp. He asked questions about a consulting group I had shut down 3 years ago. Asked if I had ever done side work for construction clients. Asked if I knew anything about whistleblower laws. I told him nothing. Just said I wasn't taking questions without legal counsel. He nodded and left. I didn't panic. But I knew Paul had hired someone again. Someone with teeth this time. He wasn't trying to fix his image anymore. He was looking for someone to blame. Then something happened I didn't expect. I got an email from Mark.
Pour les sons.
He said, I know what you did. I don't blame you. That was it. No threat.
No plea.
Just understanding. I didn't reply. I didn't know how. But I sat with it for a while. And I started thinking about all the years I spent climbing out of a hole that Paul had helped bury me in. All the years everyone looked at him like he was the gold standard and I was the family disappointment. Now, his kids won't even visit. His wife lives alone in North Carolina and sends out Christmas cards under her maiden name. His grandkids don't use Ridley on anything. College, resumes, social media. And Paul? Paul's name doesn't open doors anymore. Closes them. But there's still one last piece left. One thing he never thought I'd touch. His foundation. The one he built in honor of our father. The Ridley Senior Grant Fund. That's where this all ends. Let me know when you're ready for the final act. The ending will be detailed, dramatic, and full of fallout. The Ridley Senior Grant Fund. Paul started it 10 years ago, around the time the lawsuits began piling up. It was his way of rebranding himself as a man of the people. A builder who gives back. The foundation gave out scholarships to underprivileged high schoolers wanting to go into construction management or trade schools. Everyone loved it. Local news wrote glowing stories. He got awards from city councils. One senator even gave him a recognition plaque. What no one knew was that the fund was fake. It looked real. It had a board, a budget, a shiny website. But it was mostly a funnel for write-offs. Only a tiny % of donations ever reached students. The rest was recycled through dummy accounts, used to offset legal losses, pay off consultants, and keep Paul's name floating in charity circles. I knew it from the start. I just waited until the right moment. That moment came when the IRS sent out a notice that they were reevaluating charitable organizations tied to firms under federal investigation. They'd already been sniffing around his offshore accounts, so I nudged them a little. I sent them 2 files. Just 2. One showed duplicate payments from the Ridley Senior Grant Fund to a consulting agency in Nevada that had the same mailing address as Paul's law firm. The other showed that 5 of the 12 scholarship recipients listed on the website didn't exist at all. Not even as fake people. I don't know how long it took after that. Maybe a month. Maybe 6 weeks. But then the dam finally broke. Paul was indicted for wire fraud, tax evasion, and falsifying charitable records. His mugshot ran in papers across 3 states. There was no suit, no smile, no press-ready tie. Just a bloated, tired man in a county jumpsuit, looking like he'd aged 30 years overnight. The same man who once toasted me in front of the family like I was a punchline. The trial lasted 4 months. His defense was sloppy and underfunded. His former friends had long since scattered. Even his personal attorney stepped down mid-trial, citing conflicts of interest. He got 10 years. Minimum security. Not a violent place. But it didn't matter. He was gone. Finished. The moment the verdict was read, I felt something strange. Not joy. Not even relief. Just silence. I didn't go to the sentencing. But I did get a letter a few weeks after it was over. It was from Paul. Just 1 paragraph typed.
No epalegi. No emotion.
Just this. You waited 20 years to destroy everything I built. You won. I hope it gave you peace. But you should know you're just like me now. That line stayed with me. Pissed me off at first. I wanted to throw the letter in the trash. But then I read it again. And again. And I realized, maybe he was right. I'd spent 2 decades building my entire life around tearing his apart. I didn't date. Didn't remarry. Didn't take vacations. I missed birthdays, funerals, and holidays. All because I was chasing a slow, quiet revenge. And now that it was over, I didn't know what was left of me. A month ago I saw Mark again. We met at a diner off I-75. Plain booth. Cheap coffee. He looked older, heavier. Worn down but not broken. We didn't talk about the trial. We didn't talk about the foundation or the ruined deals or the years of silence. He just asked me one question. What are you going to do now? I didn't have an answer. I still don't. But I know this Paul Ridley's name doesn't mean anything anymore. His grandkids use fake names on every application. His business partners won't return his letters. His old college took down his photo from the alumni wall. And the man who once laughed at me in front of 100 people? He spends every morning sweeping a prison library floor, trying to get through the last few years of a life he used to think was untouchable. And me? Maybe I didn't build towers or stadiums. But I built this. Quiet. Patient. Precise. And every time someone Googles his name now, they see the truth. That's my legacy. And it's one I earn piece by piece.